Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me for my presentation. It's a review of digital technologies for productivity and productivity gains in the New Zealand building industry. I'm Tabinda Chaudhary, and I'm a PhD student, first-year PhD student at the University of Auckland Civil Engineering Department. So today I'm going to go through some introduction on the topic industry signals, some key terminologies, the aims and objectives for the paper, the research methodology that I used, some key findings, and a conclusion and the research significance. So getting you started on the background for this subject, now the mega trends of the global construction of the world, like such as the urban population, is constantly remodeling the construction industry to improve productivity, to provide more affordable housing and expand the capacity of the infrastructures. While the global construction sector has a record of poor productivity, the scenario in New Zealand is much alike. In New Zealand, the construction industry is the fifth largest sector, and it yields about 8% GDP per year. It employs 8% of the workforce, and 87% of the urban population is in Auckland. And it's predicted that 75% of the construction will be held in Auckland alone, and the cost of the dwellings has gone up by around 27% since 2007. Now, this poses a struggle for the largest city, which is Auckland, leading it to become a potential asset bubble. So in New Zealand alone, 24,000 houses are built each year, and the rebuild of Christchurch is going to take up a large part of the national construction capacity. On average, the number of houses built in Auckland is 7,200 against the modest Auckland plan, which is 2050 to build 14,000 houses every year. So construction industry is said to have the lowest productivity, and some of the reasons explained are because of difficult on-site management, poor safety conditions, shortage of skills, and lack of innovation embracing practices in the construction industry. Moving forward, the Building and Construction Productivity Partnership has come up with the motive to increase productivity by 20% by the year 2020, and the government scheme, which is called the Kiwi Build, aims to build 100,000 homes in the next 10 years. And for this, going digital is a solution because the industry can then shift towards digitization in order to improve this sector productivity, and this is where my research comes in. The construction industry is among the least digitized, and some of the reasons are because of the lower availability of funds, because of the affordability issues, resistance to change from the traditional practices to move on towards something new, the threat of the new terms and conditions, and the absence of the condition of contract, which is the NZS 3910, and the risk aversion towards adopting new technologies. The industry signals. So my research aligns with some of the industry signals, such as the National Science Challenge, which is to build better homes, towns, and cities. The BRANZ, which is the Building Research Association of New Zealand Industry Research Strategy, and the Industry Needs Survey to provide more affordable housing and increasing the productivity. So what exactly is productivity? In construction industry, the productivity is the investment in capital for labor, raw materials, and in return of this against the profit from the scale of the product. And why is it important? Is because 1% in increase in productivity would indicate $139 million of GDP in New Zealand alone. For the scope of my project, the digital technologies will be referred to as, for the scale of this paper, actually, the digital technologies are referred to as the advanced ICT, the information and communication tools, that is going to improve the productivity and also the cost efficiencies across the construction life cycle activities. So construction life cycle activity is embedded in the management of all the construction projects to lower the whole life cost, to improve the overall productivity and increase the value of the services. So the overarching theme of my research project is to assess the impact of digital technologies on construction productivity, and we aim to signify digitization as a function of productivity performance in New Zealand building industry. And the objective of this work for the paper was to examine the potential of digital technologies in construction lifecycle activities. So how digitization operates across the New Zealand construction sector as yet is not well understood. And the lack of research to understand the impact of digitization productivity creates a gap for my research. Because it's a literature review, it's a theoretical exploration of understanding the potential of digital technologies, the research method used was pretty much straightforward. So I've used the basic search by the title, abstract, and keywords using Scopus as my main source of literature. And I've shortlisted about 144 papers just to find out the key functions of digital technology that can improve productivity and the cost efficiency. So based on, these are some of the top journals that had the most information on digital technologies being utilized in construction that improves productivity and as well as the cost efficiencies. And the top one was Journal of Automation in Construction. Among the list of countries that were identified that have contributed to papers on construction, on digital technologies in construction, USA, Canada, and UK were the top ranked, which seems logical because the government and the industrial practices, they emphasize on implementing digital technologies more in these economies as compared to other countries in the list. And there is an increasing trend between authors to focus on digital technologies in construction, on how they can work with the industries, and the increasing trend, as you can see. But then there is also a decrease, which can be a bit misleading because during my search, I had very much specifically searched for the papers, such as I said, digital technology is used in construction. I did not specify any digital technology. I didn't say BIM or RFID or GIS in digital technology because I wanted to see what all are there in literature between 1998 to 2018. But the trend seems to be increasing in this past 20 years. These are some of the top digital technologies that we have identified. There were 31 in total, but then I only put up the top 22 technology and the tools that were repeated in the literature. And based on the key functions of the digital technologies from this list, we developed a framework. We developed a framework for productivity analysis. So the digitization, productivity of the construction lifecycle, the top 3 functions that we had isolated for productivity analysis. One is the ubiquitous digital access, the whole building, whole of life decision making, and the cost reduction engineering. So the ubiquitous digital access is the capability afforded by the digital technologies to give access to the information on site regarding material handling devices or even tracking the worker or even the worker activity recognition. The whole building, whole of life decision making is actually a concept that was, that was commenced by the Building Research Association of New Zealand. And it was there to establish the environmental impact of building designs and to encourage more consistent use of building based on the life cycle consideration. Now, this concept is particularly important in New Zealand because it facilitates a stronger connection between the supply and demand of the construction products. So digital technologies are going to facilitate more real-time data, access to more real-time data, such as the production status across the building life cycle, and this will consequently improve communication, collaboration, and the teamwork that is necessary for life cycle-based decision-making. And the third concept was the cost reduction engineering. which depends heavily on the cost reduction abilities of digital technologies. So when the cost of the facilities are reduced, the facilities themselves become more affordable and therefore more accessible to the greater population. So given the scale of the Auckland housing shortage and the rebuild of Christchurch, the digital technologies or the automation technologies do pose a very beneficial advantage, and that can leverage meeting the housing demands in New Zealand. So the research implications are parted in two ways. One is in terms of the literature, and one is practical. In the academic literature, because it's a theoretical-based exploration of the digital technologies applications in construction life cycle, it creates an avenue for those contemplating the study of digitization in the sector. And for practical implication, it's going to increase the awareness of digital technologies, because not many users are still aware of the benefits of digital technologies and are usually risk aversive, and ultimately aiming to increase the productivity of the sector by 20% by 2020. So that's all I have for today, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.